Welcome back, everyone. Next, we have Humanetics Pharmaceuticals, founded in 1988, is a privately held clinical stage pharmaceutical company located in the Minneapolis metropolitan area, engaged in developing and commercializing products to enhance human health and well-being. Please welcome founder, chief executive officer, and director, Ron Zenk. Nice to see you, Ron.
Thank you, Anna. Appreciate that.
All right, the floor is yours. Call me back when you're ready for questions.
Very good. Thank you. So Humanetics, as Anna said, we're out of Minneapolis. We're developing one of the most advanced radioprotectant oral drugs in the biodefense industry right now. We licensed it directly from the Department of Defense, and we are actively pursuing two near-term commercial revenue opportunities. One is a medical countermeasure to protect soldiers on the battlefield in this crazy environment right now. It's very relevant. And also for cancer radiation therapy to protect the healthy tissues from the radiation used to destroy solid cancer tumors. To date, we've raised approximately $100 million in capital. Of that amount, $65 million is non-dilutive capital from federal grants and contracts. No interest, no payment, no repayment, and very focused use of proceeds. And so for every dollar that's been invested in our company by folks like you, we've been able to match that with $3 of non-dilutive federal grants and contracts. So our medical countermeasure product is nearly fully funded through emergency use authorization and acquisition by DoD. That funding is from DoD, but we still need funds to conduct our phase 2B clinical trials in cancer radiation therapy. So purpose of this presentation, we are seeking financing up to $24 million in 3 tranches of $8 million each, successive based on the attainment of performance milestones, to conduct 3 clinical trials, phase 2B clinical trials that we're currently missing. Everything's prepared for that. INDs are filed. We're looking at beginning in non-small cell lung cancer, and then halfway through that, moving on to prostate cancer, halfway through that to head and neck cancer. So it is somewhat of an overview of the company. So we're a biopharmaceutical specialty pharma. Developing our drug is called Bio300, very selective estrogen receptor beta agonist, which modulates inflammation, fibrosis, cell cycle, and DNA damage repair. Our nearest, as I mentioned, our nearest commercial opportunity is in biodefense as a medical countermeasure with a significant longer-term opportunities in oncology. We've received $65 million in cumulative funding from federal agencies to date, and most recently, $20 million from the Department of Defense that we received just last September 2023, provides funding for Bio300 so that we can file for emergency use authorization and provide stockpiles for the Department of Defense. And so just as I mentioned last September, the DoD awarded us $20 million to carry us across the finish line for emergency use authorization. We are now fully funded for the medical countermeasure path through EUA, other than our corporate operating costs. And all work is contracted through the JPEO at the military's premier research facility in Fort Detrick, Maryland. And that's important when I speak about our employees and our board members. So key highlights: 4 active INDs. We have indications in biodefense, cancer radiation therapy, and interestingly, in inflammatory lung diseases. As we did a lot of work in our cancer radiation therapy and non-small cell lung cancer, COVID hit. And during COVID, you heard the cytokine storm, pulmonary inflammation, fibrosis, very similar to what we saw in our cancer radiation therapy studies in non-small cell lung cancer. And so we expanded that to look at treating long-haul COVID, and we have a phase 2B clinical trial underway that's funded by NIAID right now. Again, $65 million non-dilutive funds. We have $43 million of active contracts under that number, with about $29 million in cash remaining to apply directly towards these goals of EUA. And we have a $5 million line of credit based on factoring those federal funds. So our development pathway: medical countermeasures on the left, oncology on the right. Under countermeasures, we're the only orally administered prophylactic countermeasure in advanced development. This drug was invented and initially developed by the Department of Defense. We got the exclusive rights to it several years ago. We have this countermeasure program has generated significant non-dilutive funding for research and development, including this $20 million grant in 2023. We have open INDs. We have orphan drug designation for this drug, and we have FDA fast track designations. There's also the possibility of a priority review voucher, which is a program approved by Congress, currently waiting to be reapproved by Congress, to issue they have the FDA issue a priority review voucher to our company upon FDA approval of Bio300 as this medical countermeasure. The priority review voucher has a fantastic secondary market for it, ranging from $75 million to $150 million based on recent transactions. So that's another funding option for us going forward as we approach FDA approval. When we look at the oncology side, again, we're fully funded to EUA on the countermeasure side, but we need to raise some funds. The purpose of this presentation to conduct the phase 2B clinical trials in non-small cell lung cancer, prostate, and head and neck cancer, to have the studies and the efficacy together to be able to move forward with that and to commercialize. So we're proposing a sequential phase 2B studies in those three indications, about $8 million each, and looking at a convertible, or I'm sorry, as a preferred equity offering up to $24 million that would have three tranches of $8 million. And so now if we look at the current market environment for the countermeasures, you have very aggressive nuclear positioning by Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, very obvious. The DoD is looking for prophylactic drugs soldiers can take to protect themselves against accidental or intentional exposure to radiation on the battlefield. Putin attacking Ukraine, the potential for nuclear power facilities melting down for lack of cooling, and then releasing radiation. So it's a very urgent, timely issue that the DoD is very quickly addressing. And so in terms of information on why we believe this works, we've conducted efficacy studies in non-human primates. We have to follow the animal rule, unethical to test radiation and exposure in humans, only safety. And so this study shows there were 8 primates. They received one singular injection 24 hours prior to an LD50 total body irradiation. And as a result, Bio300 conferred a 50% improvement in survival in these animals. We also have, so again, we're out of Minneapolis, state of Minnesota. We have fantastic congressional support from both the House and Senate on a national level in Minnesota. And so part of this $20 million was issued or granted by the Budget Appropriations Committee for the Department of Defense. And this letter shows you the chairman and the ranking member in the Senate. They had communicated to us that it would be helpful to hear from your senators or your congresspeople. And so our 2 senators, Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith, wrote this letter just in December saying, we value what this company is doing, and we believe you should continue supporting it going forward beyond the initial 20. Similarly, out of the House, virtually everyone in Minnesota, our House of Representatives, signed the same letter in November requesting continued appropriations to develop this for the good of all of the United States, including the war fighters, but then branching to first responders and others that need it. So we have tremendous congressional support, and that helps a great deal when we try to move forward with further congressional funding. So now I talk a bit about cancer radiation therapy. Most of us know someone who's going through cancer radiation treatment right now. Non-small cell lung cancer, if you have a tumor that's inoperable, they have to zap it with radiation to kill it. When they do that, it also damages the healthy tissues in the lungs and the heart. And so what our product would do is to provide protection to the healthy tissues, but not to the tumor. And that was an important distinction that the National Cancer Institute raised with us on how to demonstrate that. So over 50% of solid tumors receive cancer radiation therapy, and that's about 50,000 uses or individuals per year per category: non-small cell, prostate, and head and neck. And so if we look at the phase 2 clinical trial, tumor control, one of the issues was, would this protect the tumor? And so this study here, and we can provide obviously much greater information, 70% of the subjects had partial or complete response versus what we would have expected, about 55. So it clearly was not protecting the tumor. And when we look at the adverse events and quality of life, one of the biggest concerns about cancer radiation therapy is you're so miserable from the side effects because of the damage to your healthy tissues that you may stop or take a break, and that makes the treatment that much less effective. And so what we found in our phase 1 clinical trials, that very minimal adverse events and clear improvements in quality of life. And again, we have these papers are easily available to everyone. So back to our non-dilutive funding, $65 million. We've received it from the Department of Defense, from BARDA, from the National Cancer Institute, from Fauci's group, the NIAID, and from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And one of the biggest things that I feel good about is that this provides some of the best scientific due diligence in the world. The government brings together medical experts, scientific experts as a panel. They review every proposal before they fund it, and they score it, and they determine that this is something indeed they should be funding. And so to date, we've received 20 different federal grants and contracts, all focused on the same drug, demonstrating that even the government's medical and scientific review panels think very highly of it. So how do we protect it? We now have over 30 patents issued worldwide, covering methods of use, formulation, manufacturing, and we also have orphan drug designation from the FDA. As I mentioned, we're pursuing emergency use authorization. We all learned about that with COVID. It enables the Secretary of Defense to connect with the Commissioner of the FDA and say that the product has been demonstrated to be very safe. It appears to be very efficacious. We want to get it to our soldiers to protect them, soldiers and first responders that might have to respond to an emergency. Excuse me. Commercialization strategy, twofold: medical countermeasures, get to EUA, allow the purchase and stockpiling from the government as medical countermeasures, and then complete our FDA regulatory approval, and to begin to sell directly to foreign governments, friendly foreign governments, and first responders worldwide. In terms of cancer radiation therapy, we need to complete our phase 2B clinical trials in non-small cell lung cancer, prostate, head and neck cancer, and then partner with Big Pharma to conduct late-stage clinical trials, seek FDA approval, and commercialize. Our management team, very well-seasoned group. I'm happy to say our most recent addition is Admiral Colin Chin, MD. He's our Chief Medical Officer. He was the former Joint Chiefs of Staff surgeon. He worked in the Pentagon for several years and was responsible for all healthcare for all military forces. And so we've got a great internal management team. And importantly, we have a world-class outside independent group of board members. Our chairman of the board is Admiral Matt Nathan. He's the 37th Surgeon General of the U.S. Navy, and he serves as our chairman and very influential and understands the internal workings primarily of DoD and the healthcare requirements for soldiers and Navy. Jake Nunn, he's a venture partner with SR1. He was a former partner with NEA, very well known. Our more recent board member was General Barbara Holcomb. She was a former commander at Fort Detrick. And when I first started, I mentioned Fort Detrick is where we're conducting much of our research for the government. And so she was a former commander. And Colin Chin, that I mentioned previously, he was her deputy commander. So we have a very good insight into the workings at Fort Detrick. Tim Morris, CPA, he's been the chief financial officer for a variety of public companies, raised over $1.5 billion for these companies over his career. And Tom Jasper is also CPA. He's the chief operating officer for a group called Choice Bank in Minneapolis, and he was a former vice chair for Twin City Federal, which gave him a lot of insight into working with Congress as well. So he's been very helpful to us. So key value drivers, creating liquidity options for us. We have multiple clinical indications, same drug in markets with urgent unmet needs. We have several competitive advantages, few competitors. We've demonstrated a customer demand with Department of Defense in our most recent $20 million award. We have a clear regulatory pathway with multiple open INDs, and we have other advantages like fast track and orphan drug designation. Phase 2 clinical programs are queued up, ready to go, subject to funding, significant non-dilutive government funding, and a broad patent portfolio. And so that is completion of my presentation, and happy to take some questions.
Great, Ron. Thank you so much. Let's go back a little bit. Talk about where this drug came from, if you can break that down for us.
Oh, absolutely. So about 10 years ago, I had a very good working relationship with the Department of Defense. It's called the Armed Services Radiobiology Research Institute, or AFRI, located in Bethesda. And we had another drug we were talking to them about developing to improve the overall health of soldiers so that they're in the most fit they can be when they're on the battlefield. And they brought up that radiation was a big concern. Would this work on that? It did somewhat, but they said, you know what, we have a much better one, and if you'll run with it, we'll give you the license. And so, little serendipity, right place, right time, but it worked. And so we ended up with exclusive rights to that, and then we've almost felt like their development arm since then, because they've continued to fund ongoing development. And then they branched it out to NCI and said, you know, all the radiation used in cancer therapy, this might help protect your healthy tissues. And so that created that link. NCI branched it out to NIAID. So it's been a very good working relationship with the government.
Fascinating. What specifically is required to complete development of the Bio 300 as MCM, and maybe explain what that acronym is?
Yeah, so MCM is a medical countermeasure for radiation. So it's a prophylactic drug they can take to prevent harm caused by exposure, accidental or otherwise, to radiation on the battlefield. So to get it to FDA approval, as I mentioned, right now, Bio 300 is the most advanced radioprotectant in the biodefense industry. We're just now entering pivotal animal studies, and we noted that it's under the FDA animal rule. We can't expose humans intentionally to radiation, so you do that with animals, demonstrate efficacy. We have to do pivotal safety trials in humans, probably 300 people. But because we've done our phase 2A clinical trials and a lot of the COVID trials, we have many people that have already been on the drug for 12 weeks, daily, but no adverse effects. And then we have to bridge the animal efficacy and the human dosing together to FDA to say, this is the dose that worked in a non-human primate. This is a dose we believe will work in humans, and here's what the relevant biomarker we use to make that determination. And then lastly, just completing the drug manufacturing, the registration batches, process validation, et cetera.
Can you explain in some more details what the FDA animal rule is?
So FDA will not allow you to expose a human to radiation just to see if your drug works, cause harm. And so the only human involvement can be for safety, to take the drug to make sure it's safe. But then they test it on animals, primarily non-human primates, to say, for example, the one study we did a lethal dose of radiation to these animals, and all of them that were on Bio 300 survived. That was it. That was the end point, was survival.
Wow. We have a question from Beth Adkins asking about the funding. How is it structured? Is it in shares, units, warrants? Explain that for us.
Yeah, so it's a preferred equity offering, just shares of preferred stock. It has a one-to-one liquidation preference on it. That's the main feature. It's a $75 million valuation. This is our first round of preferred stock. To date, we've sold only common stock, and so we've authorized this offering, and it's just a preferred shares at $340 a share, which works out to be about a $75 million valuation.
And Al Shelton has a follow-up. If you can give the valuations for the past raises, where was your first, and what is the valuation on the current? So
interestingly, you noted we started in 1988. So our first equity rounds were in the 90s. Those were our last equity rounds. We have not raised money since then. And so those were valued at, I don't know, 25 million probably. We've done some convertible notes, but those are convertible at this preferred offering price at a discount to that. And so that doesn't set the valuation. So when we work through valuation models with our bankers, looking at the 65 million non-dilutive and the prospects for the priority review voucher and other revenue sources from the emergency use stockpile, we arrived at the 75 million on a highly discounted basis.
And Eric Stevens asks, can the radiation protection eventually be sold to civilians like chemical suits? And also, is there a different IND approval process for the military?
The IND, well, that'll be under the animal rule. So the IND approved, yes, it would be completely different for military versus cancer for humans. Iodine, people say take iodine for exposure to radiation, will protect your thyroid, but the rest of you is still going to be damaged and cause the harm. And so ultimately, we would love Bio300 to be in everyone's medicine cabinet to say there's been a nuclear power facility meltdown in your area, take this and evacuate kind of thing, to put it in all the U.S. embassies worldwide. Right now, the embassy in Ukraine is very subject to exposure to radiation just from the power, Chernobyl plant even melting down and digging that up. So yeah, ultimately it's, the rollout is going to be U.S. warfighters, U.S. first responders, NATO, and then friendly countries, Japan, Europe, anywhere that people would need it. So there's a very large stockpile potential. It's got a good shelf life, so it's probably 3-year, shelf life, but a really massive market to try to fill.
And James Morris asks, at what point will you get past primates in the radiation protection?
So approval, so primates will end it in for efficacy. We can only test in primates for efficacy. So that will be the end pivotal study will be in primates for the medical countermeasures. For cancer, it'll be directly in cancer patients that are receiving directed radiation to kill their solid tumors.
And Kelly Townsend wants you to talk about your facilities. Where are you conducting your studies and your trials? And maybe talk a little bit about your R&D team.
Sure. So the facilities are very highly required to manage radiation. So we have none. So we're mainly a virtual contract management company. Most of the radiation testing is done at the DoD on their radiation facilities in Bethesda or at JPEO. They coordinate it, but we've worked with the University of Maryland. We've worked with DoD. Anyone that has the highly sophisticated equipment to do radiation exposure and testing. Our R&D team is massive in terms of our outside consultants. As part of this 20 million that we put together to do the EUA, we've brought on another 15 outside independent consultants that are experts in different areas. Our other team, we have quality control, manufacturing, overall R&D management. Colin Chin, our chief medical officer, joined us to give us some of the guidance there.
And Brian asks, have you exhausted government grants yet?
Not even close. We think we're in, it's just the Congress in particular really wants to support soldiers and civilians and themselves. And so there's a big drive to continue this and to keep taking it forward. I'm always surprised that the following year we end up with additional funding to keep it moving. But with our congressional support, senators and Congress people, it's amazing. And that goes a long way.
Good to hear. Well, Ron, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers today?
It's exciting times. We're finally at that point where there's 2 major commercial opportunities, countermeasures within 2 to 3 years for EUA and stockpiling. And depending on how quickly we place parts of this offering and move it forward to begin our phase 2B clinicals in oncology, we have a 3 to 5 year window to do all of this. And it's very exciting. It's very rewarding. And you feel good about your investment.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the conference. We'd love to follow along your journey with future updates.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Stay with us. We'll be right back.